All right. Hey there, folks. Even though convention signings and other live events are back on track, I figured I'd keep bringing book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin Rollercoaster, intriguing interviews with creative minds. So tonight, we're going to be hopping into the writer's chair and talking some tradecraft. In particular, we'll be diving into how to build magic systems and genre fiction. On our panel tonight is my pal and fellow Crazy 8 Press inmate, AARON Rosenberg, a best-selling writer of, well, just about anything and everything you can think of: novels, novellas, short stories, children's books, and RPGs. Welcome back, Aaron.
Thanks, Russ. Good to be back, as always.
All right. Also on our panel is the Nebula Award-nominated BETH CATO. She is known for her poetry, short fiction, and Clockwork, Dagger, and Blood of Earth novels. Welcome, Beth.
Hello, thanks for having me.
All right, and rounding out our panel is my pal and author, SHERRI WOOSLEY. SHERRI is not only a horse enthusiast, but she is a SIFWA member and award-nominated author, and who has also written various short stories and novels. Welcome back, SHERRI.
Thank you.
All right, so just a heads up to the folks at home, feel free to send notes, comments, or questions you have for the panel in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, so whether it's superheroes, elves, dragons, or even hardcore sci-fi, I think it's safe to say that from the audience perspective, whatever source of power is being employed, there needs to be a set of rules that the world follows. And for tonight's purpose, we're going to be using the word magic as an umbrella term to encompass all genres. All right, so which brings us to the tradecraft of creating magic systems, so that we're all on the same page. And here's the first question for the panel. So let's just talk a little bit about what are the core types of magic systems and how are they different from each other? All right, Aaron, why don't you just get us started?
I mean, that's a tough question because, it's one of those things that's kind of like apples and oranges. And I always come back to like the scene in Legal Eagles where, one of them's dividing things by size and the other's dividing things by destination. It's a question of what systems you're using to figure it out. There's a lot of conversation, for example, with magic about high magic versus low magic, but there's also, dark magic versus light magic. There's inner magic versus outer magic. I mean, there's so many different ways to look at it. And I think that's really the first thing you have to do with your magic system is figure out what yardsticks you want to use. There's always some kind of spectrum involved, but you have to determine what those poles are, and that'll help you figure out, where along those tracks you can be.
Right. So Beth, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think those rules have to be among the first things that you figure out, because I personally find it very boring if I'm reading about someone who is a god who starts the book, they have, and it's too easy for them. And, the plot feels like it just, falls along the way they want, or, it's almost like that Marty Stew, Mary Sue thing where they're just too good to be true. Magic needs to have positives and negatives. There have to be rules. There have to be vulnerabilities to it. And I think building in the twist to that, that's where you can really have fun in a plot.
All right. So SHERRI, anything just in terms of kind of just types of systems? What do you think? Anything else that we left out?
I think another important question to ask is who has magic or doesn't, and who has access to it, and what does it cost? What do you have to give up? Does the society value it, or does it make you kind of a rebel?
Okay, that's interesting. I guess I hadn't thought about it. Does the world that you've built, do they value what that power might be? Okay, fair enough. So let me ask you this. Is it important for either the author or for the audience to know where the magic originates? Or is it simply enough just to state, this is just how it is? So SHERRI, why don't you keep going?
Okay, so I think one problem with kind of keeping it a mystery of where the power comes from is that then readers and maybe the writer, it feels like it's not cohesive. Like if you haven't already kind of have a plan in place, then it feels like you're making it up as you're going along. And then you can have some contradictions later, which you are going to have some very astute readers, and they're going to be on it like that. So that's one problem with kind of hiding it, is it has to be deliberate and you have to know the answer so that all the pieces line up.
Right. I mean, I appreciate that. And we'll talk about more on consistency issues. I'm talking, and I'm just wondering if you're answering specific to the the source of where the power like comes from is right. I just want to be clear that we're kind of talking about just, you know, that elemental base. So Beth, what about you? What do you think?
I think it needs to be mostly explained, but I also think if you have to strike the right balance where some things can be a mystery. It's like in my current series that begins with 1,000 recipes for revenge. I have 5 gods of cuisine. They're food-oriented gods. I have a god of salt. I have a god of fermentation. I have all these different things, but you know, and I don't think this is a spoiler to say this at all, but I never go into where did the gods themselves come from. I leave that as an open question because I don't think if you explain everything in mundane detail, I think you risk losing some of the mystery and you know the magic of it too. But you need to provide enough to give them a basis so that they don't feel like you're holding out or that the author doesn't know the answer either. You want to portray competence or try to.
Right. And so what about you? Is it important for you? So when you're either as the reader, the viewer, or the author, how important or is it not that you understand where, even if you know what the powers are and how they function, do you need to know where they come from?
Yeah, I mean, I would say absolutely for the writer, you know, not necessarily for the reader. I'm a big believer in the sort of iceberg principle. You know, 90% of it's can be hidden underneath, as long as I know where it comes from. You know, but I agree with Beth. I mean, you know, there's a degree to that, right? I mean, you know, Beth knows that, you know, she knows that hers are gods, and she knows that it's, you know, culinary based and things like that. But like you said, doesn't have to know necessarily where each of those gods came from and exactly how that mechanism works, because you always want to leave some element of surprise, even for yourself, but you definitely need to have the answer to where is this magic coming from in general and what kind of magic this is. Because otherwise, like Sherry said, you know, there's all these inconsistencies that crop up, you know, and people, you see it when you read a book. You can tell if the author actually knows what's going on with their magic system or not.
Right. I mean, so for example, if you just say, oh, the gods of cuisine or whatever they are, is it just enough to say there are gods of cuisine? This is kind of how they function. Why there are gods of cuisine is that sort of, it's not a necessary question to answer.
Yeah, I think, leaving some things a mystery like that. Yeah, or it's a case like, you know, Aaron said, where it's an iceberg thing, and I have ideas about things, or you know, where the god originated, but is it relevant to the plot? Not necessarily, no.
So it's just enough to say, hey, we've set up, this is just how it is. I'm not going to give you the why it's here, but this is the what and the how, right? That's enough to kind of satisfy the integrity of the story and the world that you're building.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not giving them, you know, like a AD&D compendium on this is my world. Right. I have those kinds of documents, but my agent, my editors make sure I don't put too much into the books.
Right, fair enough. All right, so let's kind of get down into the weeds a little bit. So what's the difference between, say, a soft power system and a hard power system? How does that work? So Aaron, why don't you just kind of start that one?
Well, I mean, I don't usually use the term soft and hard for things like magic, but you know, really, I think what you're talking about is sort of an innate versus a studied system in a lot of ways. You know, one of the things that people typically think of when they think of magic systems, they think of fantasy novels, is incantations, you know, the hand gestures, the material components, you know, drawing the pentagrams and all the other things. You know, versus something like, for example, Piers Anthony Zamp novels, where every single character has one magical trait, one magical skill or gift in varying degrees of power, but it's innate. It's something that they automatically have. They don't need training. There's no one to train them because everyone's is different. So, you know, I really think it has a lot to do with that sort of setup of deciding if your magic system is sort of an external versus an internal. You know, the internal one is a softer style. It's definitely a more personal. It's, you know, it's in a lot of ways harder to explicate, which is both good and bad, because, you know, like Beth said, I mean, you have all kinds of notes, you know, you may have all kinds of great ideas about it, but you don't have to spell out certain things that way. Whereas if it's the more external version, if it is like spell casting with incantations and structures and language and, this more rigorous training process.
Right,
You
right.
actually need to have all that figured out in advance. You really need to be very consistent with that one.
Right, right. So if there's sort of, hey, I just woke up one day and I have ice powers, I have them and I'll figure out how to use them, as opposed to, I've heard about a spell that will allow me to develop ice powers and I have to study the books and find the magic potion and go through the forest and go find the right? Is that kind of
exactly
right?
Yeah.
So let me ask, so Beth, so in those cases, and I'm not judging either way, one being better or worse, and I don't know that either one is better or worse, but what do you see as being what do you appreciate about the innate power that you just wake up and you have it versus the power that has to be, let's say, more earned? Or or more, again, we're talking about systems, so a system of power, magic, whatever it is, where like you have it or you have to achieve it in some way.
And like you said, they both have value. It really depends on where you want to start the story. Because I mean, I love a good, middle grade-ish, 10, 11, 12-year-old kid. Their powers manifest, they go off to magic school. And that way before Harry Potter, going back very long time. It's a great trope to play with. And I think there's a lot of fun and value in that. But I also like joining a character who has that experience, who has that maturity, who has that background. So really, I think a lot depends on the audience and the kind of story that you want to tell. But they're all a lot of fun to read or to write.
So Sherry, what about you when you're thinking about the implementation? And I want to be just to sort of maybe broaden the conversation a little bit. I know we're talking about, we say magic, so we tend to think about the more fantasy side, but also let's keep in mind that we're also talking about, even in sci-fi, right? There have to be certain powers, whether it's technologically based or it's through training, just that there's sort of a system in place for those who have powers, skills beyond just sort of an ordinary person, just to sort of clarify that. So for Sherry, for you, do you tend to gravitate more towards, hey, I was born with this, or one day I woke up with this and I can do a thing? Or are you more of, no, you know what, I like more if you want to be able to do a thing, you have to really go earn it. You have to accomplish a task or uncover the thing or train or whatever it takes to get to that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I always love in a story when you have that training montage, like in a movie, it's like where it fast forward and you see how hard the person's working.
Right.
But I personally prefer when the magic or technology comes from the individual. Like in the Scorpio races by Maggie Saveder, one of my favorite books, it's like through the relationship with the horse, so the water horses, that's kind of how the magic manifests. And so I personally prefer to read about kind of power that just kind of extends beyond reality and just seems almost natural in its supernaturalness.
Okay, so I'm going to start with, I know Aaron has a lot of thoughts on this, but I'm going to start with Beth on this one. Okay. When you sit down and you think about, and the reason and I know Aaron's going to laugh when I say this, because I know we've had this conversation many times before. When you sit down and think about power systems, how detailed do you get? I'm talking about on the creation side. We'll talk about what shows up on the paper later. But when you sit down and say, okay, here's my world, here's my system of powers, how detailed and refined do you get? And what are the various sub layers that help define the magic system and then the powers of each of the characters that have powers?
Oh boy, yeah, I see. I love this kind of world building. This is my kind of fun thing. I've had different magic across all of my book series, and what I do for each of them is I build Word documents and I do notes and notes and notes, and I have kind of my own rule system that I build in the background. But for my current series, because it is food-based magic and the magic is derived of ingredients, I sought out on archive.org and downloaded many old, I'm talking 15th, 16th century cookbooks, French food cookbooks translated into English. And I literally went through and I skimmed, you know, it's hard to read, you know, you have the S's look like F's and, you know, it's kind of tedious, but fun at the same time. But I went through and I culled recipes and I rewrote them to incorporate magic. And I went through and I did that. I don't know how many hours I spent, and I essentially built a recipe book using to fit into my France inspired world. And one thing I did in my revision process on 1,000 recipes was I added epigraphs to all of my chapters. And a lot of the epigraphs, you know, it's like maybe a couple paragraphs at most, sometimes even just a couple sentences, but it can be a quote, or it can be a story about the gods, or it can be all different little factoids about the world. It's a sneaky way to build in some fun world building. But a lot of them worked out to be a good place to actually insert recipes into the chapters. So it's not an info dump in the middle of the chapter, but there's a recipe. So it gave me a chance to incorporate some of this research directly into the book in a kind of inintrusive way that ended up being really fun. And all my books are different with how I do it, but in this case, it was literally recipe books.
All right, so Sherry, so for you, you know, when you're thinking about, you know, you're writing something that involves a magic system, do you just sort of say, well, you know, I kind of know what it is and that's good enough, or do you have, you know, a really extensive Bible that kind of lays out, here's how it works, here are all the categories, the subcategories, and the layers. So, and if you do, what are some of those layers? Like what's important to have figured out in advance and what's not?
Okay, so I wish I were more organized. I really admire people who do that. Like, so I really, you know, have a lot of admiration. But for me, for my novels, it helped me to use the system that was in place in terms of I'm using gods who already have established powers. So my interpretation then was, okay, if this is an ancient god of commerce, what does this mean in America today? Oh, well, okay, I'm going to put him in the home state of Walmart and have it be, you know, be commerce related. Someone who's into, you know, the you know, Ishtar, who's the goddess of beauty. Okay, well, let's set up so that, you know, she's very sensual and has like those painting competitions. And so that's going to be a scene. And so I'm able to use kind of the system that's already been established because they're ancient gods. And then I'm also doing that with my newest novel, Persephone's Crown, where I'm modernizing Greek deities. And again, just because I'm not super organized, it helps to give me like a frame to begin working with. And then I can change the details to be more of quirky shariness.
All right, so Aaron, I know how much you hate having rules and systems in place to be organized.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So walk me through. So your process of, hey, you know, you're building this world, and regardless of what shows up in the final book or story that you've written, what goes on for you behind the scenes? What kind of layers, what elements have to be for you on the page, fully thought out? What layers for you need to be there? Well, otherwise, you know, you risk kind of the infrastructure of your system kind of wobbling or falling apart at kind of the wrong moments.
Yeah, I mean, so Russ is giving me trouble because he knows that my background is in role-playing games. So, I mean, I've built magic systems. I've written entire books on magic systems. So I am ridiculously detailed about it. I mean, you know, as we've already talked about a bit, I mean, the first thing, of course, is figuring out where the power comes from, what structure, what style. I usually start, honestly, with something kind of like, you know, what Beth did in terms of like culinary, you know, just with a flavor or a feel or a motif, you know, of, you know, what kind of magic do I want? What style do I want in this? You know, my Relican Chronicles are bone magic. And I just thought that was just going to be fascinating to play with, you know, and then thinking about what that means, what can you do with it? Where can you take it? But then I start getting seriously into the weeds with it, you know, and I start building out power structures, and I built out charts and graphs and guidelines. I mean, I do in fact build like entire magic systems.
So let's dive into that a little bit more. Let's get really granular. So you can say that you build graphs and charts and things, but what's on the graphs? what's on the charts, what actual elements, like, is it, the characters within this world can have this much power or that much power or this much power, or like what kind of decisions for you have to be there so that there are guardrails that you can operate within? Like, tell me what those boxes actually look like.
So for example, I mean, so the Relic Chronicles, which is one of the biggest and most different magic systems I've built, like I said, is bone magic. It's also caste based, so I started out thinking about it with those two elements in mind, in terms of bones, in terms of caste, and figuring out that duration was going to be a factor, that quantity was going to be a factor, that the
So
ability,
sorry to interrupt. When you say duration, do you mean duration
how long the power lasts
at any
when you
particular
activate it,
moment,
when
or
you
through
use it?
someone's lifetime, or both?
No, when you use it at that
Okay.
moment.
Right.
For example, how long a spell would last, essentially.
Okay.
And also how much material it requires to cast that spell. Certain people can cast a spell for a longer period of time. Certain people can cast it for only a short time. Some people require a great deal of material, some very little material. And it's certain things are innate, but certain things are learned. So there's an innate level of ability that you're born with, in terms of how much you can harness, how quickly, how long. And then it becomes a question of what you do with it, how you use it, and that's honestly, I mean, just to go back to some of what we were talking about before, that's one of the fun things about building a system, is when you're doing something that's more, everybody has their own magic, their own unique trait. That's fun and interesting because it's individual. When you're building a whole system, the exciting part, at least for me, is here's how different people use the same thing. It's like handing 5 different artists a pen and saying, draw an image, and each one of them's going to do something different with it, but they're all using a pen.
Right. So let me ask you, just as an example, do you say, so whether you have an innate power or you've obtained it in some fashion, do you need to figure out before you start writing, no matter who you are, there's just a limit, for example, to when I'm using the actual power in this moment, no matter who you are, it can't last more than an hour, or it can't last more than a day or a week? Do you need to have that level of specificity, or is it sort of, it could be any amount, and I just sort of I make my decisions based on kind of plot and character needs?
So, I mean, for me, there is a certain degree of flexibility. Like any good game master will tell you that you have your rules, you have your dice, but the story trumps all. There are moments where, which is why game masters have game master screens that the players can't see, when you roll the die and you say, you know what, I don't like that result. It doesn't fit the story. It doesn't fit everybody's involvement. It doesn't make people excited. So I'm just going to ignore that and we're going to do something else. And the same thing is true with the magic, and that's one of the advantages of us having all of our details, but the reader not seeing all of it, is, yes, I know that this character will essentially immolate themselves if they try to use the power continuously for more than a day. But you know what? It's been just about a day and everything's getting exciting and they know they're pushing their limit. Am I going to take out the stopwatch?
Right, so you can fudge it, right?
Yeah, you fudge it a little bit, here and there, but you know what those limits are so that you can abuse them when you need to.
All right. Do you, that's fair enough. Do you prefer it when, so you have a power, right? Whatever it is that you do, I can fly. But hey, you know what? My energy cells, whatever it is, like Superman can fly seemingly forever, but maybe that's not the way it is. I could fly for an hour, a day, a half hour, whatever it is. Do you prefer it where the power just stops working at a certain point, or if you cross this threshold, like you die, or you burst into flame, or you're unconscious for a week because it drained all of your power and you just can't function anymore? Or if I use it more than 3 times, I start losing years off my life, where there's consequences to the use of the power. So Beth, what do you think?
Yeah, I think consequences are necessary because, like, going back to my earlier comment, I think having someone who is an all-powerful god is boring. I want to see limits. I want to see them this sounds terrible. I want to see them bleed, you know, they need, part of the journey for the hero is suffering. They need to go through that mentally, they need to go through that physically, they need to learn from that experience. And if they're this all-powerful being that can just fly loops around the earth forever, that can get boring. If I see someone flying, I mean, to me, it's like the show Heroes years ago, which had a great first season and fell apart. To me, I was like, well, okay, is this guy's superpower really flying? But also with the elevations he's going to, isn't his power also, I mean, he's surviving, he should be a frozen rock up here. So doesn't he also have a power, you know, what's keeping him alive up there? It's more than flying. It's how can he breathe? How is he not freezing? To me, those complications, that's where the fun comes in as a writer.
Right. So there's a danger, I would say, and if your character is too powerful, it's just
Yes.
it's dull, right? Because you're sort of like, all right, what's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
All right. So let me ask you this. So Sherry, is it enough for you that the characters understand their powers and how they work, or does the audience have to be able to say, okay, I get how this system is set up, and how, even if I don't know where it comes from, I understand the rules, so now I can kind of get on board? Or is it just enough that the characters know it?
So Aaron, when you were talking about the way you have organizations and charts and you've got this, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, again, that's amazing. That's just not the way my brain works. So my personal challenge as a writer is to make it clear to the reader so the reader can engage with me in the problem solving. I feel like when readers are like trying to think of a solution too as they're reading along, then you know you've caught their attention. You know they're in the story, but to do that, they have to know the rules too.
Right. Fair enough. Okay, so I have a question here, and this one's I'll start with Aaron. So I'm going to go back to Superman just as an example. So, and because I know we've had this conversation as well many times. So in some instances, and we'll just use Superman as an example. So Superman struggles, right? He goes to pick up a bus and he goes, right, and then he throws it across the street. But then he can fly around the earth so fast that he can literally turn back time and change the rotation of the planet. So there seems to be a little bit of an inconsistency here. So what's your take on kind of rule consistencies and how you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, there has to be consistency. There has to be internal consistency. There also has to be narrative consistency. And a lot of it has to do with, you know, Beth was talking about consequences, which I 100% agree with. But there's also balance. You know, it's fine to have Superman or a Superman-like character who's only strong enough to lift a bus and only by straining, and yet be able to fly around the world, you know, 1,000 times without blinking or tiring. If you set it up from the start that the flying, the speed, and like Beth said, his secondary abilities to let him survive that are his primary, and picking up a bus is a secondary. You know, I love having characters of any kind of, you know, quote magic, whether it's, you know, science fiction or superheroes or whatever, who have like hidden abilities, who have secondary abilities, who have unexpected to them abilities manifest, you know, at the last minute. You know, it's narratively exciting to have a character suddenly spontaneously like sprout a new power and a new ability, as long as it's consistent with who they are, with what they've been doing and where they've been coming from. And again, as long as it's balanced, as long as there's a consequence to it, as long as gaining that power takes something else away from them, you know, things like that. You know, so, and you don't always have to know all of those beforehand, but you have to know there are possibilities for those. You know, you can't have a magic system that's so structured that no one can ever get a secondary ability, a secondary mutation, and then suddenly have someone have it. But if you've even set up the hint that that's out there, the reader then trusts you. The reader knows that you have this idea in your head, that you've laid the groundwork for it. And, you know, I agree with Sherry that, I mean, you want the reader to be sort of coming along with you and figuring things out as you go. But there's also a degree where you want the reader to just trust that you know what you're doing, because you've shown them enough that they know that you figured it out. Even if they don't get all of the details, even if the character doesn't know all the details, they know that you do. And that's okay, because then you can sit back and you can enjoy where it goes. and have your theories and see if you're right, see if you're wrong, but you know there's an answer already.
All right, fair enough. So Beth, so one element of power sources that really bugs me from time to time is when it seems as if every character to enter the story has pretty close to the same exact power levels. And I'll just give one example. So in the TV series Arrow, Oliver Queen went through literally hell and back over many, many years to become a master at archery, martial arts, and strategy. Yet after a while, every team member, some person who joined his team within like 3 months of training, and every henchman he encountered after that was almost as skilled as he was. Like, what do you think about that? And I'm not talking about just specific to Arrow, just in general, where it's sort of, no matter who shows up, we pretty much have the same level of powers, and it's almost like who wants it most. What do you think about that?
There are places where you can kind of budget, and I think superhero stories, there's a little more wiggle room with that. I don't write that way. My heroines tend to be outliers. They tend to be misfits. They tend to be powerful in a way that makes them targets. And that's a recurrent theme throughout my books. And I handle that in different ways in each series. But that is my theme, because I think consciously I do want to avoid that, because I know from my personal experience what it's like to be bullied, what it's like to be a target, what it's like to feel like experiencing the world through just a very unique perspective and not understanding what that means. And hey, now I'm diagnosed with autism as in my 40s, and things make a lot more sense. And to me, channeling that into my characters is just natural, that they are that bit quirky, that bit different, and they're powerful in that. But again, there are consequences to that too.
So Sherry, what about you? Are you sort of more of the belief that within the power system, that whoever's in that system is essentially, even if the powers are a little different, that they're kind of equally matched, or does that not ring true for you?
So generally the way I write with mythology is the more belief in that deity, the stronger they are. So therefore the deities are competing to have more belief in them, whether fear or love. And so it changes who's more powerful at a given time based on what they are doing from the people who are aware of them. So that can change the levels. And then for my human characters, I have one who chose to pursue forbidden blood magic. So she became strong very quickly, but then she's going to plateau, as opposed to another character who kind of is doing it the right, difficult, disciplined way, who it's taking her longer, but she's going to be able to keep climbing. So that's kind of the way that I address that.
So Aaron, let me ask you a question. So how important is it, or to you, is it or is it not, that the characters within your magic system are defined more than just their power? Is it or is it not important that the characters are defined more than just their powers, regardless of the type of magic?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And actually, this is kind of my answer to the previous question too, because I don't care if I have one character who's Superman and one character who's Batman, one character who's Hawkeye versus one character who's Thor. It doesn't matter to me if I have one character who's clearly more powerful than the other characters. And the reason I put quotes around that is because I approach it from the sort of gaming party perspective, which is that every character has its purpose. And as long as, Batman has his purpose, Batman does things that Superman could never do. Part of that is just mindset. Part of that is sheer willpower. It's training, it's everything else. As long as every character has something that makes them important. Like the worst kind of game is the kind of game where you've got one character who's good at everything, and 2 or 3 of you are basically sitting there doing nothing because they're doing everything. But a good game master says, oh, well, you're good at this thing and you're good at this thing, and now we're going to focus on this thing, which is their turn to shine. But here comes this other thing which they suck at and you're really good at, and it's the same with writing characters and stories. So I just make sure that all of my characters have something, if you take the magic away from them, they still have a personality, they're still people, and each of them has their strengths and weaknesses, and that is reflected in their power levels. It's part and parcel of it. and they all have something that they shine at, even if they have the least amount of power in the group, technically.
All right. So Beth, sort of a follow-up question. So when creating a magic system, do you build the system around the characters, or do you build the characters around the system?
They grow together. I think that's all part of me creating that series of documents as I'm doing my initial world building before I start writing and outlining. I'm figuring that out. And as I research, as I read, that's when those details start to come together. And like, I'll read something because I always force myself to do gobs and gobs of research. And, you know, even if it's a secondary world, I want my facts straight. I want the recipe to work. So everything needs to come together. And for me, and you know, I think it goes back to what the others were saying earlier. It's part of the fun is the discovery along the way. It's, you know, I can build all these details before I start writing, but as I write, I realize, okay, I need to fix this, I need to do this. So in the revision process, I finesse those things even more.
All right. So I want to ask, we talked a little bit about before, I want to dive in just a little deeper. So let's just talk about for a minute sources of vulnerability for the characters within the system that have powers. Now, what's your take on, and I'll just kind of give it an example. So Superman is basically unstoppable unless he comes across kryptonite or he's taken away, he's in with the red sun as opposed to a yellow sun, but almost impossible to obtain either one. He's essentially invincible, but he does have a vulnerability, whereas other characters are, you know, they can be wounded, stopped in kind of various ways. What's your take on how many, how intense, or how accessible or not a source of vulnerability actually is to those who are trying to thwart them? And what do you think?
So, you know, I think, again, it has to do with balance. You know, a lot of it, the greater the power, the greater the vulnerability, and the more readily accessible it should be. You know, and Superman has one other huge vulnerability, which is in fact magic. Superman is completely vulnerable to magic.
Right.
And, you know, it's a great example for this sort of thing, because if you compare him to Captain Marvel, they're pretty well matched in terms of strength, in terms of speed, in terms of invulnerability and flight. Superman has, you know, the vision powers and things like that, but Captain Marvel is not vulnerable to magic because he is in fact a magical being himself. So there are times when Superman, rightly so, steps back and lets Captain Marvel take the front because he knows that he can't do it.
Right.
You know, and it's, and so I think, you know, if you've got somebody who has a very small amount of power, a very focused amount of power, you can have a very small, very focused, or very rare vulnerability. But if you have someone with, you know, as Beth keeps saying, you know, gods are boring. You know, if you have someone with these godlike abilities, you want a serious vulnerability, something that's really out there and really can take them out at a moment's notice, whether that's internal or external. That's a separate conversation. But you need something that could at any moment sideline them. Otherwise, it's just all about them running around reshaping the world.
All right. So, Sherry, let me ask you, and I want to, and this is, I've been dying to ask this all day, well, all hour. What is, when it comes to creating systems of magic, whatever they might be, what is your absolute number one unbreakable rule?
Oh, man. Okay, that's a great question. My unbreakable rule is that I guess I don't like super powerful characters. So I would never, I don't want to say never, but I mean, you did say unbreakable rule. So I think that my internal unbreakable rule is that I am not going to have anyone go above a certain power threshold, because I'm more interested in relatable characters and I know how flawed I am. So I want to identify with other characters who are just struggling to get through. Even if they do have magic, they still have to struggle. So my unbreakable rule is I'm not going to have any characters who it's just super easy for, because that's just, I can't even imagine it being super easy to get through life.
All right, Aaron, same question. Your number one unbreakable rule when it comes to creating a magic system.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Sherry. It's no one is all powerful, but also no one magic and no one power is perfect. And this goes back to the balance and the consequences and the vulnerabilities. There is always a flaw. There's always a way to circumvent it. There's always a way to outsmart it, to redirect it, something. Because otherwise, like Sherry said, it's boring. It's not interesting. You know, who wants the perfect power? I mean, in D&D, the wish spell is the stupidest thing ever because you can pretty much do anything with it. And they even had to put in caveats of that. You can't wish for more wishes and things like that.
Right.
But even so, you could rewrite the entire world. That's not fun. That's not interesting.
Right. Fair enough. All right, Beth, same question. Your number one unbreakable rule when it comes to creating magic systems.
For me, it's that magic is intimate. For all of my characters, it is something very personal, and often it's intertwined with faith in the gods, faith in themselves. In my Clockwork Dagger books, it's faith in the lady who is a giant world tree, who is the source of healing powers within the world. In my current work, it's the gods of food, and you call upon them as you're cooking if you're a chef, and you can imbue greater flavor and magical powers and things. To me, it's all about having that personal connection with not only your magic, but the source of that magic. And to me, that's intertwined. And that is a theme across my works.
Okay, that was great, but now it's time for a special segment on the show where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories, which I created especially for this panel, and none of them have ever been on this show before. Wherever it lands is what you get, and the categories are Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magic, The Last Airbender, Witch's Brew, Magic Mike, Secret Superstitious, Illusion, Delusion, and No Such Luck. All right, Beth, you're the newcomer. You get to go first. You ready? Here we go.
I guess. I don't know. You're in it. What am I getting
All right,
into here?
what do we go? What do we got for you in round and round? And you got Illusion, Delusion. All right, what the hell did I come up with here? All right. Illusionists employ various techniques to give off the sense of a magic event, when in reality, it's all sleight of hand. If you could master just one illusion, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. I think I would, this is the first thing that came to my head, so judge me as you will, but
trust me, we're judging you, trust me.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking the power to have people see cats. Like almost, and it could be a therapeutic thing, like say someone is highly allergic and okay, now you're surrounded by cats, you're being loved by cats. Or if someone is terrified by cats, they're your weapon. You're going to send this flood of cats at them. I don't know. To me, that
okay.
As a cat person, hey.
Okay, you're gonna plant cat thoughts in someone's head. All right, fair enough.
Yes.
All right, Aaron, you're up next. You ready, buddy?
Oh yeah.
All right, round and round, no duplicates and no whammies. What do we got for you? And you got Magic Mike. Okay.
I'm terrified.
You should be. No. You are suddenly and unexpectedly called on stage in front of thousands of people to sing. You're pretty nervous, but thankfully you are standing in front of a magic mic, which will give you awesome vocal powers for only one night. If you could sing like anyone ever at any point in history, who would it be?
Jeez. God, who would I sing like? All right, I mean, because there's like 5 gazillion choices.
Oh, you only get to pick one.
I know, so I'm just gonna go classic, and I'm gonna say Art Garfunkel.
All right, fair enough. Bridge over troubled waters. Can't argue with that one.
There you
All
go.
right, Sherry, you're up. And here we
Okay.
go. All right, for you, we got no duplicates. So Secret Superstitious. All right, here we go. This one I think will probably fall right up your alley, I think. Even the most strident naysayers will admit, in private at least, that they have at least one superstition. What's yours?
Okay, it's very silly. Ever since I was a child, you don't step on a crack or you'll break your mother's back. I cannot, like when I'm walking on the sidewalk, I can't stop. I have to go over the crack.
Okay.
It's a little silly. I don't know what to tell you.
All right, no crack stepping. Fair enough. All right, now it's time where we're going to pick your poison. I've got 4 choices for you, A, B, C, or D, and I'm not going to tell you what's behind each, but I will say they're all magic related. What do you pick, A, B, C, or D? All right, Aaron, you're up first.
I mean, I got to go with A because I got two of them. So,
All right, there you go. All right, so this one is the anti-you. You can gain magic powers in the real world as it is today. But to do so, there would be an anti-you whose powers in equal but opposite strength would also be in the world with the two of you in a long-standing battle. Under these conditions, to gain magic powers, would you sign up for it?
oh, yeah, definitely. Because I like to think that, I mean, just because he's an anti-me doesn't mean that he's a writer and a gamer. So I've got a pretty decent chance of trying to outgame him. So yeah, let's do it.
All right, you're up for it. Okay. All right, Beth. So you got B, C, or D?
Oh, let's do C for CATO.
C. All right.
You got either way there, right? I mean, B or C.
I could,
All right.
yeah.
All right, so we're going to put you in the writer's room. If you were invited into the writer's room for a new TV series where magic is central to the plot, what advice would you hope the showrunner would follow, or what request do you have?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think like if my 1,000 Recipes for Revenge, if that was being put as a show and I was able to consult on that, to me, it would be make the food, sell the food. Make it be like, on Great British Bake Off, where you see that cake and you get the close-up of that cake and your mouth fills with saliva. People need to have that sensory experience where it's so beautiful that they can smell it. To me, that's it. I want the lust for that cake.
All right, fair enough. I want to smell the goodness. All right, Sherry. So we got for you, you've got B or D?
D.
You said D for dog?
Yes.
All right. All right. So we're going to give you some truth serum. I'm going to ask you 10 magic questions. You ready?
10? What?
Favorite magical power?
Telepathy.
Most bizarre magic power?
Tasting pickles? I don't know.
Pretty bizarre.
Okay, I never saw that coming. All right, levitation or misdirection?
Misdirection.
Lord of the Rings or The Witcher?
Lord of the Rings.
Magic wand or flying carpet?
What can you do carpet? Carpet, you can do more things on it.
All right, magic beans or magic mushrooms?
Mushrooms.
Good for you. Harry Houdini or Penn and Teller?
Houdini.
Okay, who wins in a battle between Mxyzptlk and Doctor Strange?
Doctor Strange.
Okay, any character from fiction where magic of any kind is used, you'd like to see get a better or more expanded storyline?
I really liked watching WandaVision, and I would watch more.
All right, fair enough. All right, have you ever been to a psychic? If yes, what was that like? And if no, are you willing to try?
I went once to have my palm read, but I was not very impressed. I would like to go if I felt that there's actually someone who's like it was real. If there's someone who I felt was real, I would definitely go. But my experience, I was not impressed with.
All right, fair enough. All right, so we have time to take some questions from the audience. If anyone's got any, I don't see any in the. Okay, here we go. Magic question for all. This one's from Brad. Is writing magic easier or harder than writing other forms of fiction? And which do you prefer? All right, we'll start with Beth.
I don't know if it's easier or harder, but I find it more fun. And that's why I keep writing about it. That's really the draw for me. It's something fun and I can explore it in different ways all the time. Sure. I think whatever I did, I'd have a lot of research involved, but I think hard science fiction, as much as I love to read it, it's not my thing as far as writing it. Magic, yeah, I can flex. I research a lot, but it's more my wheelhouse.
All right, Aaron, what about you?
Yeah, I would say that it's harder in a way because obviously you have to come up with your system as opposed to, for example, the real world. And obviously in magic, we're again talking about that includes hard science fiction, any structure that you're having to build like that. But it's also easier in some ways because you're building it from the ground up. And let's face it, the world doesn't seem all that consistent half the time. But if you're the one setting down the rules and you get to actually lay them out and make sure they make sense to you, right, and you know them, which if I knew all the actual rules in the world, I'd be set. So,
yeah, wouldn't we all though?
Yeah.
All right, Sherry, anything? What about you?
Like magic is the escapism part for me. So like that's the pleasure, like to get away from this and to escape into something else.
All right. So you just sort of, you just want to kind of get outside your head and see what else is out there.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. I think I had one other question that I wanted to get to that I didn't ask. No. Okay. I think we're caught up. Is there anything else? Nope. That's it. Okay. So we have a little time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I think we've got some goodies. So bear with me just a minute, and we're going to get to it. All right. Hang on. Where are you? Share screen and goody. Boom. And okay. So Beth, what are we looking at? Talk to me.
That is the cover for 1,000 Recipes for Revenge, published by 47 North. That is my new book that came out this past June, and the second book in the duology is coming out in January.
So what's the setup?
The setup is essentially it is a food magic and musketeers. It is a secondary world that's based on Musketeer era France, and kind of the rest of Europe as well. And it's food magic, chaotic gods, a lot of daring do, swashbuckling action, and it's about chefs and their powers from the gods, and lots of food. If you don't read this while you're hungry.
All right, sounds good. All right, Aaron, talk to me, because I know we've talked about this many times. So talk to them.
Yeah. So this is Bones of Empires, the first book of my Relican Chronicles series. It's epic fantasy with an Asian feel to it. I describe it as Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon meets Game of Thrones. The magic in it is, how do I describe it? Ancestor worship in the form of ritualized cannibalism. People literally consume the bones of their ancestors and gain their skills and experience. And as a result, the society as a whole is stagnant and dying, because why learn pottery for 30 years to be a master potter when you can literally inhale a pinch of great grandpa's ashes and gain all of his skills in pottery. So the book is about a pair of brothers who are setting out trying to make their fortune in this world. The emperor, who is desperate to find some way to reignite the passion and energy of his society. A young thief who gets dragged into things much against her will. A rather resourceful young woman who's willing to do pretty much anything to get ahead and has some pretty impressive long-term plans, and all kinds of foes from both within and without.
All right, very cool. And how many books are in the series altogether?
So it's a 5-book series. The first 4 books are out. The 5th and final book should be out probably started next year.
All right, very good. All right. So Sherry, what do we got here?
All right, Persephone's Crown is coming out soon. It's I'm calling it a midlife deity book. So often when people think of Persephone, they think of that idea of, when either she gets stolen by Hades or it's romance. No, this is after there's 2 kids. It's, contemporary America, and she's working as an environmental scientist, trying to get native species plants planted because, the gods don't have much power anymore. But her mother Demeter is trying to reignite the secret society to create more belief in the gods. And so Persephone finds herself torn between taking care of her 2 teenage children, trying to get to Hades, finding the pomegranate seeds, and placating her mother.
Is that all?
Oh, that's just in the first 2 chapters.
Great. And when will we be seeing this?
Hopefully in November.
All right. And this is under your pen name, Serby Gray?
Yes, under Serby Gray, yes.
Serby, sorry, not Serby. Serby. Okay, so November. All right, terrific. All right, that is great. Everyone, sounds like we got 3 great books out there. You should definitely check them out. All right, as for me, I'm really excited to share with you the launch of my new book, Blunt Force Rising. It's the 4th novel in my ongoing series featuring hard-boiled Private Eye Angela Hardwick. So not quite magic, but it has its own system and rules. In my mind, Hardwick is part Doctor Who, part Blade Runner, part Sarah Connor. In Blunt Force Rising, Hardwick and her partner, Eric Whistler, are providing extra security on a Galaxy cruise ship for an AI, robotics, and cybernetics conference. But that event quickly devolves into a bitter fight between the pro-Android and anti-Android community. And for me, in this book, androids are a surrogate for any marginalized group who seem to engender all sorts of hate from people who can't seem to rationally articulate where the hate even comes from or why it seems to consume them so deliriously. Anyway, a murder takes place on board the cruise ship, which sets off a chain of events which is more horrific than even Hardwick has ever seen. And when it's all said and done, I think it's safe to say that Hardwick and Whistler will definitely never be the same. This one is also, unlike the other in the series, this one is a locked room mystery thriller. So if you're up for some close quarters mayhem with some real philosophical discussions about who has rights, who doesn't, and why, then this one is definitely for you. Blunt Force Rising, it's on sale now in ebook and print and paperback, and be sure to get yours. And in the meantime, I'll encourage you to check out the first 3 books in the series, Crackle and Fire, Fractured Lives, and Hot Ash. But I want to be clear that each novel in the series, it's a standalone adventure, and I reintroduce the rules and the systems and the characters so you can jump in at any point and you can read them in any order, but there is some character development throughout, so your mileage may vary on where you want to begin. So Blunt Force Rising and the rest of the series is available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. Okay, guys, this was absolutely great. That's our show. I want to thank Aaron and Beth and Sherry for talking magic systems tonight. And thanks to everyone who's watching at home. I hope you had a great time. If you haven't already, be sure to follow me on social media and subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is all free. And all the other episodes of my series of the show are on my YouTube channel for free. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro. As always, be kind, be gentle, and generous of spirit. And I'll see you all next week. Take care. All right, bye now. See you guys.